If there's one character in the Old Testament that really is a highlight character, it is Moses. The books of Exodus through Deuteronomy, 4 out of the 5 first books of the Old Testament, really highlight how God used Moses. Moses lived for 120 years. The first 40 were as Prince of Egypt. I remember my girls growing up, they loved that movie. The Prince of Egypt. It was an animated film. They still remember the songs from that. And I appreciate those animated films that highlight Bible characters. I don't know if everything in the movie was accurately depicted, but one thing for sure, Moses was for 40 years a prince of Egypt. We'll talk more about that. The second 40 were as a shepherd of sheep in the wilderness. I mean, if there's any stark contrast that someone could go through, it'd be to be in the royal courts of Egypt and then to go to the wilderness to take care of sheep. And I think most of us, we really have no idea of either. To be royalty and to be the lowest of the low, which would be a shepherd. In fact, when Joseph brings his brothers from Canaan to Egypt, and he tells his brothers, ask to have the land of Goshen, because that's prime real estate for shepherding, for raising sheep. But he says also that shepherds were despised, right? So if you can imagine, Moses experienced everything life would have to offer. I mean, Egypt was, you could say, the superpower of its day. And then to go to the wilderness to take care of sheep. And a number of years ago, I went through Psalm 23. And, if you know anything about sheep, sheep are not the most, let's say, helpful of creatures. And so it's a 24/7 job that is very, very frustrating. And you can imagine that he spent 40 years shepherding sheep. And then the last 40 were being the shepherd of the nation of Israel, taking them from Egypt to the promised land. And that might be something we really can't understand. If it was frustrating to deal with sheep, I mean, I don't know, in my mind, I'm very imaginative. So when I think about what would I do if I were Moses, well, if you were a sheep and you are particularly stubborn, well, tonight we might have lamb chops. I mean, if you're going to keep frustrating me, at least you're going to be good for something, and that's dinner. Okay, that's a little harsh, but I'm thinking though, but you can't do that with people. You can't say, hey, you frustrate me enough, I'm going to eat you. No, that doesn't work, right? Get rid of you. Maybe we'll conveniently kind of take the flock over to a cliffside and oops, oh, sorry, bye-bye, you fell over the cliff. I mean, you can't do that with people. I can't imagine what Moses had to go through for 40 years, 40 years of frustration, of people rebelling against him, criticizing him, wanting to kill him. His own family members turn on him. I can't imagine 40 years of, on one hand, trying to be obedient to God as God asks him to do things that just seem absolutely impossible. And as we'll talk about at the end, there's one time in the 40 years that Moses messes up. And that is when God says, speak to the rock, and then water will come out. Now, this happened a previous time where he hit the rock and water came out. Now, if you know anything about the Israelites, right, they complained about everything, particularly food and water, which makes sense. You're in the wilderness. If you need anything, what do you need? Food and water. But they complained and complained. And, we might think somehow that we would be better than them. I don't think so. We complain when we go to McDonald's and it takes more than 10 minutes to get our food, right? I mean, I've thought that. You call this fast food. If it's not going to be fast, just change it. Call it slow food. I mean, people get upset when the food doesn't come out on time, much less wondering where it's going to come from. So Moses, after dealing with this rebellious people, and it wasn't just a small group of people. Okay? Now, for the sake of illustration, I'm just going to use you, okay? Don't worry, there's no one here that I'm thinking of in particular. But let's just say you are the Israelites. I'm Moses. Taking care of a group just even this big is not easy. Can you imagine taking care of a group of possibly upwards of 2 million people? I mean, I've been on mission trips, taking 25 people around, trying to get them fed, trying to get them from one place to another. It's hard. I remember in previous trips, people complaining about all sorts of things. Why is it taking so long? Why do we got to do this? Why do we got to do that? And I'm thinking, why am I here? I could have just stayed home. I could have just enjoyed AC. They don't have AC in Europe at the time. They don't even put ice in drinks. I mean, I have my own complaints. I remember one time going to a restaurant asking for ice, and they gave me 1 cube. And I thought, this is like so, it's just hard to imagine. But I'm thinking, if I could complain at that level, I cannot imagine what Moses had to deal with. Now, one of the fun things about having Bible software is you can do all sorts of fun searches. So I just said, well, how many times is Moses mentioned in the Bible? 787 verses. The name Moses is mentioned. I only found 2 names that were mentioned more. David, which was 900 something times, and Jesus. David actually was mentioned more than Jesus. Well, that was an interesting thing. Not that you have to read too much into that, okay? Doesn't mean David's more important than Jesus. But when you think about Moses, I think the next Old Testament character that was mentioned, the amount of times was something like 240. So Moses is mentioned quite a bit. And if you are familiar with the Old Testament, there is one thing that most people would associate with Moses, and that is what? The law. In fact, it was referred to as the Mosaic Law. When Moses took the nation of Israel from Egypt, he took them eventually to Mount Sinai, and that's where they received the law. In John 1:17, it says, "For the law as given through Moses." Now, some people might say, well, the law was about Moses, but grace and truth were about Jesus Christ, because that's what the rest of John 1:17 says. For as the law is given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, it's true that the law came through Moses, but that's not the only thing about Moses. In fact, that is not even the main distinctive of the life of Moses. It doesn't mean that the law, and by the time of Jesus in the New Testament days, the religious leaders had really corrupted everything about their understanding of the Old Testament. So they turned the law into just ceremonious, religious rituals and rites. They didn't actually know who Moses was and what he was about. Moses was a man of faith. In fact, his entire life is a testimony of faith, even starting with his parents. Now, we don't have all the details, like we don't have a lot of details for most of these characters in Hebrews 11. But one of the things that we can infer is this: Moses knew that there was much more to his life than what he was going through at the present time, at any point in his life. From start to finish, his life was one that was characterized by faith. In fact, it was a faith that really was exemplary because his was an enduring faith. Moses endured in faith. It was a faith that was constantly tested. And it's not that Moses was perfect either. You know, sometimes we might look at these characters and go, well, there's no way I match up with any of them. And even when we looked at Abraham messed up many times. Moses as well. But over the course of his life, Moses was not just about the law. His law ultimately was about an enduring faith in God. So let's take a look at this. Look at Hebrews chapter 11, starting from verse 23. It says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Now, if you follow Old Testament history, the end of Genesis, right, ends with Joseph. Joseph, as an Israelite, as a Hebrew, has literally, from a human vantage point, saved Egypt. Kind of a big deal, right? So the name of Joseph was honored in Egypt. In fact, he was the second most powerful man in Egypt, next to Pharaoh. Pharaoh had literally given him the keys to the kingdom. You do whatever it takes to take care of this nation. Joseph did. Now, if you remember going back to Abraham, God told Abraham in his covenant with him that his descendants would eventually go to a foreign land and be enslaved for 400 years, but then that they would be delivered in return. So between the time of Abraham and the time of Moses is roughly 400 years. As we start at Exodus chapter 2, so keep a finger there in Hebrews 11, go to Exodus chapter 2, and let's look at the beginning part of the story of Moses. Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. And a man from the house of Levi went and took the daughter of Levi as a wife. And the woman conceived and bore a son, and she saw that he was beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. But she could not hide him any longer, so she took for him an ark of papyrus reeds and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and put it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her young women, walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the ark among the reeds, and sent her maidservant, and she took it to her. Then she opened it and saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the child went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, because I drew him out of the water. Now, back in the 60s, there was a very famous movie called The Ten Commandments. Any of you see it? Okay, some of the very few folks here. It's actually one of the most epic movies ever made. In fact, the scene at the Red Sea was filmed at Universal Studios. They actually had the parting of the water scene there. Now, you won't see that now. I'm sure you could look it up on YouTube or something like that. I remember watching this movie every year. It came out on TV at some point in the year, and it presented the life of Moses from start to finish. And I just have so many of these movie scenes in my mind when I read through the Exodus account. Now, again, it's not because they were necessarily so faithful to the text, but I think they did a pretty decent job. Amram and Yochebed were the parents of Moses. They were the tribe of Levi. And like many other married couples did, they had a baby. The only problem was having a baby at that time was very risky and dangerous. You see, at that time, there was a turnover in the kings who reigned over Egypt. And so the Pharaoh at the time really had no care for the memory of Joseph. He didn't care if some guy 400 years ago did something for the Egyptians. All he saw was that now there are a whole nation of people, the Israelites, that he could use for slave labor. Now they multiplied to the point where the Pharaoh got threatened. So he said, and you see this in Exodus chapter 1, there were the Hebrew midwives, said that as you deliver babies, if it's a child, kill it. Kill all the male children. That's a pretty efficient way to deal with the problem. Kill off all the men, kill off all the males. We don't want any more future folks here who could potentially try to overthrow this nation. Now the midwives, not quite sure how it all happened, but they would somehow, conveniently miss out on the births. And they said that the Hebrew women were sturdy women and they gave birth quickly before they could come. I wish I knew better how that all worked out. But as a result, the Pharaoh says, well, he told the entire nation, anyone who has a boy baby, throw him into the Nile. Drown him, kill him. So this is where we come to Exodus chapter 2. And if you were to defy Pharaoh's edict, it was to invite death. But then they had Moses. And it says here that they saw that the baby was beautiful. Now, I don't know. It seems like we have a new baby parents here today. That's Chris and Rachel, yeah? Yeah, they're here. Okay, welcome back. Okay. Now, I know Claire is not a boy baby, of course, she's a girl baby. But I think any parents would look at their baby and what would you say? Baby's beautiful. I've never heard parents go, oh, wow. Whose fault was this? It was your fault, honey, huh? No, I think in most parents' case, though, some babies do come out a little strange looking after they come through the birth canal and their head's kind of, banana shaped or something like that. But we still say the baby's beautiful, right? I don't think it's just talking about a physical thing here. In fact, John Calvin writes this: it seems contrary to the nature of faith that he says that they were induced to do this by the beauty of his form. We know that Jesse was rebuked when he brought his sons to Samuel in the order of their physical excellence. And certainly God does not hold us to external appearances. I replied that the parents of Moses were not induced by his beauty to be touched with pity to save him, as men are commonly affected, but there was some sort of mark of excellence. Now, I'm not quite sure what else to add to that, but there was something about Moses that really stood out to them, that compelled them to say, you know what, we are not going to give in to the Pharaoh's edict. We're not going to get rid of this baby boy. In fact, we're going to try to save him. Now, after 3 months, what happens to babies? They get louder, right? You can hear them cry. It's really cute when they're first born. You hear this. Oh, so cute. A few months later, it's like, so not only are you hearing this, everyone in the neighborhood could hear this. They could report you, right? So after 3 months, they have to do something. But this is where we need to maybe take some time to reflect. We don't know the story of each individual who lived in Egypt who was an Israelite. Now, just maybe Amram and Jochebed took to heart when Joseph, about 400 years earlier, told the Israelites of the Exodus to come and to take his bones back. Now, if you remember last time we talked about this, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, at the end of their lives, they finished well, and they passed on a blessing. And the blessing was, keep the faith. Keep the faith that has been passed down to us. Now remember, again, this is a culture that was heavily based on oral tradition. So the things that were passed down, the things that you heard, those would be the things that would impact you. The promises that God had made. Just maybe Amram and Jochebed would meditate, would pray, would look forward to, especially as they are under bondage. They are slaves. They are looking for deliverance. They are looking to be saved. Now, after 3 months, they could no longer hide the baby, so the mother takes a step of faith. She took for him an ark of papyrus reeds, covered it with tar and pitch. And I just thought it was interesting to hear the word ark there mentioned. Do you remember somewhere else where there was an ark? A guy named Noah and the ark, right? She puts the child into it, puts it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Now, when we read things like that, again, we don't have every detail. But this isn't just arbitrary. This is not just random. We might speculate. Again, we don't know. You wouldn't just take the baby and put it anywhere. Where would you put this baby? Well, the place where the daughter of Pharaoh came to bathe. This is the place where the mother puts the ark with the baby. Now, there's one thing we can say for certain. We know who's planning all this. God is planning all this. This is not random. Pharaoh's daughter sees the ark, sends her maidservant to get it, and she brings it to her. She opens the ark, sees that there is a Hebrew child. And here's where there's not only the parents who are acting in faith, there's a sister, there's an older sister of Moses. Her name is Miriam. We have a Miriam. What a name. Because here is an older sister looking out for her baby brother. Now, this is bold. Who is Miriam? She's a slave. She's a slave. She's a nobody. You offend someone of the royal court of Egypt, you step out at the wrong time in the wrong place, what do you think is going to happen? Miriam's going to be dead, right? You think Miriam just kind of goes, I got nothing better to do today. I'm just going to go hang out with my baby bro, and we'll see if I can, just save him. No, this is not so cavalier. This is serious. Miriam steps forward and she speaks to Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, that is a bold move. We know that Charles got recently crowned as king, right? And, there's the whole royal family. And I suppose if you went to one of the inner circle, you don't just go up and say, hey, how you doing? I mean, you would immediately probably get just put to the ground by the soldiers, right? Arrested. Who are you to speak to Pharaoh's daughter? But Miriam, in faith, I mean, think about as she says these words, do you think she has any guarantee that they're going to be received, much less accepted? She says, shall I go and call a nurse from you, from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? I mean, there's a little bit of a plan here. She's not just saying that any Hebrew woman. Who do you think she has in mind? Mom. And then Pharaoh's daughter says, go. Now, every time I see the word go, what are you supposed to do when someone says go? Go. We don't wait. We don't sit around and think about it. We don't go contrary to that. We go. I can't imagine what was going on in Miriam's mind. Pharaoh's daughter immediately not only receives what she has to offer, she agrees to it. She says, go. I think Miriam went pretty quickly. Why? Because she went to her mother, brought her mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away, nurse him for me, and I will give you wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. Now, from a human perspective, this is just unbelievable. The baby is now under the protection and provision of the daughter of Pharaoh. In fact, she officially adopts the baby as her own, names him Moses, and said, because I drew him out of the water. The faith of parents matters. It matters. In this case, it mattered so much that Moses' life is not only saved from death, he should have been put to death. Not only is his life saved, he is now granted royal protection, royal provision, and he is now of the royal family because he is adopted. I mean, how do you go from being the baby of slaves to now the baby of the daughter of Pharaoh? Not only that, I mean, there's just like this extra bonus. Who gets to take care of Moses? His parents. And not only does Jochebed, the mother of Moses, nurse him, we don't know how many years transpired, but enough where those of you who have little ones, even when they're like 1 or 2, 3, what are you doing? You're telling them about God, right? You're singing songs about God. You're telling them about the promises of God, the character of God. They were investing and discipling and raising Moses in the faith. Because somewhere down the line, he knows that God has called him to something special. Problem is, he tried to do it in his own way, got in trouble for that, but he knew that there was something going on about his life that related to God. As parents, your investment in showing what it means to live a life of faith is never a waste. I mean, you could only think in that environment, what were the odds that anything good could come out of this? I mean, if anything, the boy baby was supposed to be put to death. Anything after that is a bonus. But not only that, Moses, he lives, he is protected, he is raised up from a human standpoint in the greatest possible way to have every advantage, every benefit, every resource. Who would not want that for their child? You know, one of the things about heaven, and I'm not sure how it'll all work, but we do have eternity, so there's a lot of time. I'd like to go to some of these folks and just say, can you expand on the story? I mean, we don't get all the details. I want to go find Amram and Jochebed and say, hey, what's up? You were the parents of Moses. Can you give us the story? I mean, I just can't imagine like just getting to sit next to Bible characters maybe for, I don't know, a decade or two at a time, right? Time doesn't matter anymore. And just tell me everything. Why did you do it? What was it like to act in faith? Maybe for some of us as parents, we don't realize how crucial, how important it actually is a matter of life and death to teach your children what it means to have faith in God. Let's go on. Faith of Moses. When we look at this passage in Hebrews 11, it kind of highlights different things. It obviously is not a comprehensive look at the life of Moses. But one of the things that I saw is that there were certain actions that are highlighted. Things that Moses did, things that he chose to do, certain things that he chose not to do. And none of those choices were convenient. None of them. Now, I don't know about you. You don't have to raise your hands, but how many of us like convenience? I think many of us like convenience. That's why there's such a thing called convenience stores, right? It's so that it would take care of all the things that we need conveniently. I mean, the Israelites, they surely would have liked a 7-Eleven along the way. Just kind of spotted all over the place as they were in the wilderness. It would have been convenient to have, just pop and get a Slurpee, especially in the wilderness. Oh, artificial banana Slurpee, my favorite. I would have gotten that every time. No, they had nothing. But Moses, I mean, talk about a life that had no convenience. Zero convenience. His life was a hard life. If we turn over to Acts chapter 7, and this is the account where Stephen, who is one of the 6 who were appointed, if you remember when there was a dispute amongst the widows, there were the Hellenistic widows versus the Hebrew widows. And so 6 were appointed to take care of that situation. And Stephen is one of them. And he kind of sort of catches the attention of everyone because not only is he helping serve the widows, he is preaching the gospel, the truth. So naturally, anyone who preaches the gospel during that time, they get in trouble. So they bring him to the Sanhedrin. They bring false witnesses to make false accusations. And if you look at Acts chapter 7, let's just go a little bit before in chapter 6. In verse 11, it says, "Then they secretly induced men to say, 'We have heard him,'" Stephen, "'speak blasphemous words against Moses and God.'" Interesting combo, Moses and God. I mean, if there's any way you want to get the religious leaders angry, it's to say this person spoke blasphemy against Moses and God. Now, against God, we can understand. I mean, no one should be speaking blasphemy against God, but he's speaking blasphemy against Moses, right? Because the Old Testament, Moses, he is the hero, at least from what they think they understand. So if you want to get someone in trouble, say, "This guy, he makes Moses look bad." So they were angry. They stirred up the people, the elders, the scribes, and they came to him, dragged him away, brought him to the Sanhedrin, verse 13, and they put forward false witnesses who said, "This man never ceases speaking words against this holy place and the law." Another way to reference Moses. "For we have heard him say that this Jesus the Nazarene will destroy this place and alter the customs which Moses handed down to us." So they're trying to get Stephen in trouble by saying he is attacking what Moses represents. So in chapter 7, and if you start at verse 17, This is where the section where he addresses the accusation about him going against Moses. But as the time of the promise, Acts 7:17, was drawing near, which God had assured to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt until another king arose over Egypt who did not know about Joseph. It was he who deceitfully took advantage of our family and mistreated our fathers to set their infants outside so that they would not survive. It was at this time that Moses was born, and he was lovely in the sight of God. Now, this is why New Testament passages provide commentary for the Old Testament. It says that in his mother's eyes, he was beautiful. But here it says that he was lovely in the sight of God. It wasn't so much that Moses himself was so impressive. He was lovely in the sight of God. God loved him. God saw him fit for his use. After he had been set aside, Pharaoh's daughter took him away, nurtured him as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was powerful in words and deeds. But when he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his heart to visit his brothers, the sons of Israel. And when he saw one of them being treated unjustly, he defended him and took justice for the oppressed by striking down the Egyptian. And he supposed that his brothers understood that God was granting them salvation through him, but they did not understand. On the following day, he appeared to them as they were fighting together, and he tried to reconcile them in peace, saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why are you treating one another unjustly?" But the one who was treating his neighbor unjustly pushed him away, saying, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" At this remark, Moses fled and became a sojourner in the land of Midian, where he was the father of 2 sons. Now, there's more to this passage, but Stephen, as he's confronting the religious leaders and answering the false accusations, he walks through the story of Moses. And what he does is this. He says, you know what? You think you know Moses, but you actually don't. You don't understand the story. These religious leaders, they had been brought up with the Old Testament scriptures. They heard the stories of Moses. They knew the law. But they were blind. You see, when Jesus was there, they heard with their own ears. They saw with their own eyes. I mean, can you imagine? They actually saw Jesus perform miracles. They heard the greatest preacher in all of history preach. I mean, you can imagine that some of these guys actually fell asleep on Jesus. How could you fall asleep on Jesus? You can fall asleep on John Kim, that's fine. But not Jesus. They didn't hear. They didn't see because they were blind. They were deaf. In fact, Jesus, they called out to be crucified. So what do you think is going to happen to Stephen? He is going to great lengths to show who this Moses was. And look at verse 35 of Acts 7. It's interesting how Stephen highlights this. He says this way, "This Moses, whom you disowned." Yes, it was your forefathers. They disowned. You're doing the same thing. Verse 36, "This man led them out, doing wonders and signs." Verse 37, "This is the Moses who said to the sons of Israel, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers." That's a reference to Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 and 18. It's a prophetic reference to whom? Jesus. Moses is actually talking about Jesus. Verse 38, "This is the one in the congregation in the wilderness was with the angel who was speaking to him on Mount Sinai." This Moses, this man, this is the one. And it's just one way to say, you know what? This one, I don't think you get him. I don't think you really understand who he was and what he did and what he represented. Now you have to think about the Israelites. The Israelites, they were the ones who saw with their eyes, heard with their ears. They were with Moses 24/7 for 40 years. And what did they do? They rejected him. They rejected him. They constantly were rebellious. And the one thing that they would say so often would be this: we just want to go back to Egypt. You want to go back to slavery? Well, you know, wilderness, slavery, manna, leeks and onions. I mean, they're kind of like comparing, and they're actually looking back towards Egypt. Stephen, what he's telling the religious leaders really through this is, not only do you not get Moses, you are just like the Israelites. Because in verse 51, he says this, and this kind of seals the deal for Stephen. He's going to die, but it's okay. Because what he says is this: you men, stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, are always resisting the Holy Spirit. As your fathers did, so do you. And which one of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They killed those who had previously announced the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. You who received the law as ordained by angels and yet did not observe it. You know, the law was given to them so that they would know ultimately the lawgiver. It was impossible to keep the law. But if you understood that, then you would know that it was only by trusting, that it wasn't by your works, it wasn't by your ability, your power, that you could be saved. You had to trust God. You had to trust God. You had to have faith that God would be the one to save you. You see, the Israelites, instead of taking that to heart, you know, think about this, men. Okay? We don't understand this as much, but back in those days, when God gave them the law and he said on the 8th day, all boy babies are to be circumcised. There was a physical mark of the covenant. You could say it this way: you had a physical mark imprinted on your body so that you would remember who you belong to. But do you remember? Because here, Stephen says, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. You see, physical circumcision didn't do anything. That's why in Galatians, when Paul addresses the issue of those Judaizers who wanted to tell believers you had to get circumcised in order to be saved, so, you know, that's actually heretical. That's a false gospel. You don't trust in a physical mark. It didn't do anything for your forefathers. It still doesn't do anything for you today. But more than that, he says, you're always resisting the Holy Spirit just as your fathers did. Isn't that an interesting use of the word Holy Spirit? Because you don't see it mentioned so much in the Old Testament. But what were they doing? What were the Israelites doing? They weren't just resisting Moses. They weren't just resisting the law and the intent of the law. They were resisting the Holy Spirit. Now go back to Hebrews 11. Why is this important to understand? So Moses, he's having to deal with this people who are constantly going against him. And he is trusting God every step of the way. He says, God, this is what you told me to do. This is what you told me to say. I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm going to trust you. So how does he do this? We're going to kind of walk through this quickly. First, verse 24, Hebrews 11, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So there, you can see it on the outline. He had a faith that refuses. Now, how could someone take a life of privilege, wealth, prosperity, and cast it all aside? Why would Moses do this? Why would he give up his identity as a prince of Egypt? I mean, these days we hear a lot about how people identify. You know, I self-identify as this, I that. And you can say whatever you want, but it doesn't make it reality. But for Moses, you could say it this way: he identified as a prince of Egypt, and it was true. He had everything, all the rights and privileges that came with being part of the royal family. Who would throw that all out? Would you? I mean, isn't it interesting that most of us are brought up with this idea that in order to be successful in life, you need to become wealthy and prosperous. You need to be recognized by people. You know, if you could have put more in the idea of our younger generation, how many views on TikTok? I mean, do you go viral? I've never had anything I posted go viral, but that's okay because I'm old. They don't expect old people to go viral. They expect old people to just die of a virus. I mean, you know, there's no thought of this. But, you know, if you're like in your teens, a million, oh, woo, I am somebody. That's kind of how we think. But this is way beyond. At that time, I mean, Moses, he has everything, but he refuses. He refuses. This is why it has to be of faith. He refuses to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He rather identify with the people of God. And this flows into the next verse, verse 25. It's a faith that chooses, verse 25, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Now you see, if Moses had stayed as the prince of Egypt, he would have enjoyed pleasures. Anything that Egypt had to offer was at his disposal. The pleasures that Egypt, whatever they had. But it says here, it's not just pleasures, it's the pleasures of sin. Now, to be sure, sin brings pleasure, but it's always temporary. Always. It is never lasting. It is always temporary. But just because it's temporary doesn't keep people from pursuing it. I mean, that's our world, isn't it? People are so quick to pursue the pleasures of sin. We are all quick to pursue the pleasures of sin. But we don't realize the pleasures of sin bring consequences. Moses looked past the temporary pleasures of sin, but here's where it's faith. It's faith to refuse to be called the son of the daughter of Pharaoh, and it's also faith to choose to be mistreated, to identify with the people of God. He chose rather to be mistreated. Now, this was not just because he was identifying with them as an ethnic, cultural sort of position. You see, that's a big deal for people today. I mean, I wrote a whole paper addressing some of that. Ethnic, cultural. I kept talking about ethnic, cultural. But you know, one of the things about ethnic, cultural, that's also temporary. It's also very limiting and finite. It wasn't that Moses was just identifying with the Israelites. He was identifying with the people of God. And you could make it even more concise. He was identifying with God. And he'd choose to be mistreated with those that belong to God. It wasn't because it was a convenient choice. He knew he was going to face being mistreated. That's faith. Who wants to be mistreated? Any of you like being mistreated? Any of you? I don't like being mistreated. I've been mistreated a few times. It's not fun. I've been threatened a few times. I've been yelled at, screamed at. It's not fun. But Moses chose to identify with God. In fact, what we're going to see, and we could even make it even more direct, Moses identified with Christ. And you go, how do you know that? I mean, they didn't even know who Jesus was back then. Oh, they did. They didn't see everything clearly, but they knew he was going to come. In fact, Moses knew he was going to come. He said, there will be a prophet like me. Deuteronomy 18:15 and 18. He says it twice. Look at Hebrews 11:26. This is why we can substantiate this. It's a faith that regarding the reproach of Christ, greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So in choosing to be mistreated, it wasn't just that he was identifying with the Israelites, he was regarding the reproach of Christ, all that Christ faced in being reproached, persecuted. I mean, if you remember, Jesus was hated, mocked. He was brutally tortured, beaten, crucified. Moses regarded everything that related to that as greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Why? For he was looking to the reward. What was the reward? Was the reward the promised land? Now that would be kind of sad because he didn't get to go in. He literally is on the doorsteps of the promised land, but he doesn't get to go in. What was the reward? Well, remember, this is why we go back to Hebrews 11, verse 1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for the conviction of things not seen. For by the men of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. Right? So everything about faith is something that they don't see. Going to verse 6. And without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who draws near to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. You could say it this way. Moses is looking to the reward of the rewarder. You know, I was thinking about this, it reminded me of Philippians chapter 3. That he would regard the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Turn to Philippians chapter 3, verse 1. It says, finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things again is no trouble to me, and it is a safeguard for you. Beware of the dogs, beware the evil workers, beware the mutilation. For we are the circumcision who worship in the Spirit of God and boast in Christ Jesus and put no confidence in the flesh. Although I myself might have confidence even in the flesh, if anyone else has a mind to put confidence in the flesh, I far more. circumcised the 8th day, of the nation of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law of Pharisee, as the zeal a persecutor of the church, as to the righteousness which is in the law, found blameless. But whatever things were gained to me, those things I've counted as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be lost because of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, that I may gain Christ and may be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own, which is from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which is from God upon faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, in order that I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. You see, for Moses, and this is why you see Stephen address the religious leaders in this way. You could say that Stephen would agree with everything that Paul was saying. And it's ironic because Paul was there when they stoned Stephen. But Paul is the one who says, beware of the dogs, beware of the evil workers, beware of the mutilation, beware of those who think that your physical circumcision even means anything. You know, Paul, he refused the life he had. He chose to suffer. He took upon himself the reproach of Christ. He said, I'd rather choose that. I'd rather choose to suffer and be with Christ. You see, that's what Moses did. Well, continues, Moses had a faith that leaves, Hebrews 11:27. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the rage of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Now, if you remember the story, you'll remember that Moses killed an Egyptian to protect one of his own countrymen. And he did this in defending him, hoping that the Israelites would understand that God was going to use him to deliver them. But the Israelites turned on him. You know why? It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right place. It wasn't the right way. So Pharaoh found out, and it says in Acts chapter 7, when Stephen talks about this, that Moses fled. And so when you read the text, we think, oh, Moses fled because he was afraid of Pharaoh being angry. No, I mean, that was maybe part of the story. But look what it says here in Hebrews 11:27. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the rage of the king. So he didn't just run away because he was scared of what Pharaoh was going to do. What did he do? He left, and then he endured. It wasn't that he gave up on having faith in God's plan for him. It was that he went to go wait. Okay, waiting is hard, right? I mean, we have a hard enough time waiting for fast food. It's hard waiting for anything. I think when I was first pastoring, in a first generation Korean American church, especially when you're younger too, you have a lot of idealism, you have a lot of hopes and dreams. And I was just like many other seminarians. You come out and you're ready to conquer the world, right? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go to the Korean church and there's going to be a reformation. I'm going to be the next Martin Luther Kim. I'm going to do something here to make a difference. And oh man, I got punched in the face. And I have to say, I fled. I didn't want to endure. No. I hated Korean people after that. I wanted nothing to do with helping them. In fact, the only parallel I could say was they're like the Israelites during the time of Egypt. We have to wait for them to all die in the wilderness. But I have to wait 40 years. This was when I was 33. That puts me at 73. I'm not even there yet. If I got to wait 40 years for these people to die, there's no point in waiting for them at all. Why wait? Why wait? Why endure? Moses didn't just flee Egypt to escape Pharaoh's wrath. The Israelites weren't ready. They needed to wait 40 more years for the right time. Moses wasn't ready. He needed to learn for 40 more years. I mean, that's faith. I mean, how many of us think that we deserve to be used by God to do something now? On my timetable, in my way. And maybe God's saying, you know what, hold on a second. Hold your horses, I want to use you. But you need to wait. You need to wait. And not only that, it's not a passive waiting, it's a deliberate choosing to endure. So Moses left. He left in faith, waiting, enduring. You know, we don't know what happened during those 40 years other than he was taking care of sheep in the wilderness. How hard must that have been after being in the courts, royal courts of Egypt, and now being with a bunch of sheep? But don't you think God was teaching him through those sheep? He was preparing him for 40 years to deal with stubborn, rebellious, difficult, frustrating sheep, so that the last 40 years he would deal with a rebellious, difficult, frustrating people and endure. I mean, the story of Moses is so amazing. You see, and then it's a faith. He had a faith that keeps. And what did he keep? The Passover. Hebrews 11:28. By faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. When you think of the 10 plagues and we just read it as a narrative, and we're like, okay, they happened, but we don't think of the faith that it took for Moses to be told by God that these are the things that he had to tell Pharaoh, he had to tell the people. And the greatest of the 10 plagues was the last one, the killing of the firstborn. And everyone in Egypt was going to be subject to the destroyer, including the Israelites. But God provided a way. God literally provided the way of the lamb. In Exodus chapter 12:21, it says, Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, bring out and take for yourselves lambs according to your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood, which is in the basin, and touch some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts. And none of you shall go outside the doorway of his house until morning. And Yahweh will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and he will see the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, and Yahweh will pass over the doorway and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. And you shall keep this event as a statute for you and your children forever. I mean, Israel still celebrates Passover to this day to remember this, but they missed the point. God provided salvation, deliverance. Can you imagine Moses telling the elders, hey guys, here's the plan. Get some lambs, kill them, get their blood, put it in a basin, and take some hyssop and put it on your doorposts and the lintel, so the 3, parts of the door. Can you just do that? I mean, I'm trying to think of the equivalent of doing something like that today. I might think, I don't know what else to say other than if I were Moses to say, hey, Lighthouse LA, on Saturday, you need to get a lamb, kill it, put some blood in a bowl, and then take something to brush it onto your doorposts. Can you do that? Would you be okay with that? Would you go, I think John has really lost it now. I don't even have a lamb. Where do I even find a lamb? And the firstborn's going to die. I mean, that's you think that's really going to happen, Moses? I mean, John? Is that really going to happen? You see, everything here is by faith. Moses telling it to the people and for them to actually act upon it. But this was not just for the sake of religious ceremony to celebrate. It's literally an issue of life and death. And forever they had this memorial, the Passover feast, where they would do the same. They would kill a lamb. They would take its blood. And they would remember, this is what God did to save you. The last one is a faith that passes. Hebrews 11:29, by faith, they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. You know, when Josh was reading the scripture reading, and I thought, odd way to kind of end a scripture reading. When they attempted it, they were drowned. The end. It seems a little dark. But by faith, and again, you know, when you watch, if you do have a chance to watch the Ten Commandments, it's with Charlton Heston. He was also on the Planet of the Apes, but try not to think about that when you're thinking about Moses. But it feels just very majestic, you know. And he says, you know, behold. And he says, the Lord is going to split the Red Sea. And it's a very dramatic picture. And you know it's made up because it just doesn't look natural in the movie. But you got to go a little bit before that. In Exodus 14, when Pharaoh is drawing near, the sons of Israel lift up their eyes. Behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. They became very afraid. So the sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh. Then they said to Moses, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What is this that you have done against us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than for us to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. It takes faith to tell the people, we're trapped against the sea. The Egyptian army is on the other side. The people are understandably afraid. But this is where you see them keep complaining. Moses, we told you this. We told you this. We didn't want to leave Egypt. Now, mind you, what did they just see? The 10 plagues. They saw God's hand at work. They are being provided for it, taken care of. You would just think, come on. I mean, I don't know. If I were Moses, I think I'd be a little frustrated at this point. I'd say, come on, guys. Think about what God has done. Did you already forget? Did you already forget how great our God is? Do you think this is an impossible situation? So when he says, do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. I mean, that had to be the most incredible experience to not only watch, but literally go through. They actually went through the Red Sea. And then as they get to the other side, the Egyptians follow them, and then they're all drowned. You see, Moses had to constantly lead by faith. Now, Moses was not a perfect man. I mean, you know, even in the beginning, he struggled with his confidence. And as I mentioned, he struck the rock instead of talking to it. And that's from Numbers chapter 20. And in Numbers chapter 20, verse 12, after Moses hits the rock with his rod, and he hit it twice, you could almost think it's for emphasis, not just once, but twice. And Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, verse 12, because you did not believe me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Both Moses and Aaron were held accountable for disobeying God for that one time. Why? Because they didn't treat God as holy. God has a standard, especially for his leaders, to treat him holy in the sight of God and the people. Moses had no right to take things into his own hands, as frustrated as he might have been, as rebellious as the people were. He had to still keep treating God as holy. So in Deuteronomy chapter 32, as they are on the edge of the promised land, this is right at the end of Moses' journey. In verse 48, Yahweh spoke to Moses that very same day, saying, go up to this mountain of the Abiram, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, and look at the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the sons of Israel for a possession. Then die on the mountain where you ascend, and be gathered to your people as Aaron your brother died on Mount Hor, and was gathered to his people, because you both acted unfaithfully with me in the midst of the sons of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because you both did not treat me as holy in the midst of the sons of Israel. For you shall see the land at a distance, but you shall not go there into the land which I am giving the sons of Israel. Now, this is why Moses lived a life of faith. Back in Numbers, when God says to him, you don't get to go into the land because you treated me as unholy. In my mind, I'm thinking, I spent all these years, I gave up the courts of Egypt, I endured all the criticism, the rebellion, the threats, all these years. And I don't get to go now? Okay, God, I understand. I need to treat you as holy. I accept that. But what would motivate someone then to keep on going from that point? How does Moses say, okay, I got to actually lead them to the very end, but I don't get to go in. Why should I keep enduring? I think this is why I really love Moses. You know, I have suffered much less, so much less. I've suffered a little, but enough times where I think, you know, I don't know if I want to continue. Like, why? Why do you go on when people literally make your life miserable? It's so hard. There's so much stress. It just is unending. I don't know how many times I just go, you know, like, I'm done. I don't want to continue. It's too hard. And for what? For what? For more suffering? Because that's what it seems like. For more difficult people down the road? Because that's what it seems like. Why plant another church? It's only going to bring more suffering with more new people who will cause you to suffer. I mean, do you understand? Like, what would keep you going? Now, that's coming from my vantage point as a pastor. From your point, you might say the very same thing. Why should I keep going to church? Look at these churches. They're all messed up. They're all hypocritical. Leadership's terrible. They always let us down. Why keep going? There is no promise of things being immediately fulfilling, successful, and especially convenient for you and for me. But we do know this: we have an opportunity to live by faith and look to the reward like Moses did. If there's one verse out of this Hebrews 11 passage for Moses that I would say look at, it's he regarded the reproach of Christ greater riches, verse 26, than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward, and the reward wasn't the promised land. The reward was God. Moses truly lived out this passage, Luke 9:23. This is Jesus speaking. If anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? In the end, Moses followed Jesus. He denied himself. He took up his cross daily for the entirety of his life. He followed Jesus by faith. He did not see him, but he had the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Moses lived by faith because he believed that God was who he said he was, and that he was a rewarder of those who would seek him. When Moses was on Mount Nebo and looked across and he saw the promised land, and then he died. What was the greater reward? Was it just to see a piece of real estate? Abraham didn't get to inherit it. Isaac didn't. Jacob didn't. Joseph didn't. None of them did. Because they were looking forward to something ahead. How about us? Do you have this kind of faith? This is a faith that you cannot generate on your own. It can only come from Christ. We humbly trust him. We walk by faith, knowing that it is only because he provides the faith. You're not going to always feel it, for sure. I don't always feel it. In fact, I rarely feel it. If anything, I'm constantly fighting against the temptation to give up. Constantly. Sometimes there are just days where there's such discouragement. Say, what's the point? Let everyone have what they want. Go back to Egypt. Go get your onions and leeks. Go back to bondage. Go back to whatever you want, because you obviously don't want Christ. That's how it feels many times. But then you look at Moses. What made him get up every day? It couldn't have been a sleep mattress, comfort bed. I got one of those. It's nice. It's set on 50. It's one of those luxuries in life that you get to have. I told Angela, can you please get this for me? This will be my deathbed. I want it to last till I die. Sorry, it sounds a little morbid, but that's it. There's nothing else anymore. There's nothing to look forward to. And even then I can't sleep really well. But you know what keeps you going? Both you and me is faith. To endure, to wait, to trust, and to keep following. Keep following. And even when you falter, and even when you fail, Moses kept going, even though God told him he wouldn't go into the promised land. He didn't give up on the people. In fact, in Deuteronomy, he walks through the whole law again with them because he's preparing the next generation. It's not because it was about him. He wanted to pass on the promises of God to the next generation, and he did. What an amazing, amazing story. I hope that will challenge you. I hope that will convict you. Let's bow our heads as we prepare for communion.